Thank you, Madam Chair. Whereas the month of February is the time that we as a nation recognize Black History Month, the theme for 2022 is Black Health and Wellness, which acknowledges the legacy Black scholars and medical practitioners in Western medicine provide and reflects on the activities, rituals, and initiatives that Black communities have done to be well. And whereas the first Africans arrived on the shores of Virginia 400 years ago, bringing skills, knowledge, and traditions that have created a lasting culture impacting our communities today, and recognizing the importance of teaching this rich, impactful history to all students. And whereas African Americans have contributed to the founding and development of this nation and its culture despite the obstacles of slavery, discrimination, and institutionalized patterns of disparity, leading to the rise of the Civil Rights Movement and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And whereas African American families developed educational institutions across the nation to assist its people to achieve, including Howard University, that has now produced the first woman vice president, and whereas African Americans have made numerous contributions to social and scientific advancements, such as those made by Dr. Charles Drew, who created the process to preserve blood plasma, allowing it to be stored and shipped for blood transfusions and immunology and infectious diseases, and expert Dr. Corbett, the scientist at the forefront of the development of the COVID-19 vaccine. And whereas those of African descent have lived in and contributed to the development and advancement of Fairfax County since its inception, as evidenced by the many contributions of private citizens, businesses, and African American organizations, as well as the establishment of various communities and organizations that have enhanced the rich and vibrant culture of Fairfax County and work to preserve African American culture and the rights of all its residents to create an inclusive, equitable county for all. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Fairfax County Public Schools hereby officially recognizes Black History Month in appreciation for the contributions of great Americans who have worked tirelessly and often without recognition for the advancement of both Virginia and the United States. I so move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Dr. Anderson. Ms. Gamarra, would you like to speak to your resolution?
I would. 1 second, thank you. Today, we acknowledge the solemn moment of Black history. This was a brainchild of Carter G. Woodson, an American historian, journalist, and author, who wanted to make sure that we in our educational process learned about the journey of Africans as they came to this continent. In contrast, the United Daughters of the Confederacy was established in 1894. I should say, Carter G. Woodson started his movement in the early 1900s. But for the Daughters of the Confederacy, in an effort to complete their mission, they raised funds to erect Confederate monuments and wrote and distributed textbooks espousing a theory that slavery had little to do with the Civil War, even though the articles establishing the Confederacy mentioned slavery explicitly in outlining its purpose. I mention these two acts because they really point out where we are today, despite Mr. Woodson's efforts to make sure that our students had an opportunity to learn about the contributions of Africans in the Americas. We still have difficulty talking about our history. Many have dreamed that being in the United States means that we have freedom of speech, that we can learn, we can talk about whatever it is we need to talk about. But the truth is, in this democracy, the history of African Americans demonstrates both triumph and tragedy. Many have believed, but have not always achieved, the ability to be seen in their full humanity. Make no mistake, African Americans have achieved in virtually every effort that they have participated in. We can see that our vaccine was brought to us by an African American doctor. Mr. Drew helped us to be able to have blood transfusions. We have architects that have helped to design the Washington, D.C., our capital. Thank you. And on and on and on. There really isn't an area where African Americans have not achieved, even golf. So, when I think about how we talk about history, the rub really arises in our recognition of recognizing both our tragedy and our triumph, and our struggle to recognize the full humanity of everyone who lives within our borders. At times, we have tolerated dehumanization through slavery, through Jim Crow, through our watching in the video of Mr. Floyd losing his life. But make no mistake, it is the acknowledgement of our past that will allow us to grow beyond the tragedy of our past. So I'd like to mention just a couple of things that I think are factual. First of all, Black history is American history. The Black experience is indicative of so many. We have suffered, endured, and risen above so much tragedy, and we have excelled. And we join many people in this nation who have suffered as well. Koreans, African Americans, Native Americans, our Jewish people, our Jewish fellow citizens. So many, I cannot name them all, so please don't think I'm leaving anybody out. I understand that many have triumphed over difficulty. But where we really struggle is really recognizing the fullness of humanity of all within our borders. So the second thing I need to say is that public education is about educating the public. I shouldn't have to say that, but we in public education, as we teach our students, we must talk about the facts of science, the writings and language arts and history. So let me say this again. In public education, we teach history, all of it. Critical to education is critical thinking. In public education, we have to discuss the facts and we have to analyze them. It is contrary to the educational experience for anyone, elected or not, to try to hinder discussions that emanate from the critical thinking process. That effort is not education, but rather the attempt to regulate thought and a continuation of the effort to prevent full discussion of our collective history. We cannot temper or hinder the educational process with arbitrary standards designed to protect the comfort of some while disregarding the educational needs of many. This is not equality. That is not free speech, and it has no place in education. If we do not respect the process of education, we most assuredly allow the ugliest parts of our history to repeat itself. Now I'd like to speak to you just for a few moments on a personal note. When I ran for school board, I understood that there would be people who wouldn't agree with me. And I decided that in my heart and my mind, I would meet with those people and we would work it out and have civil discussion. But now in this current political atmosphere, there has been a sanctioning of something other than legitimate political discourse. In the last few days, I received a letter from a constituent who expressed his extreme desire to tar and feather me. Now, I'm a bit of a history buff, and so I understand the history of that practice. It, in the history of the United States, has been used to intimidate African Americans and tell them where their place is. Along with cross burnings and lynchings, and a number of other horrific things. So I want to say this unequivocally. My place today is at this dais. I sit here today to say that this incident stresses the importance of not only Black History Month, but of the need to teach history, all of it. Cross burnings, Jim Crow laws, lynchings, the more than 1 million people who died at sea just so they could be forcibly ripped and divided from their families so that they could provide free labor is part of that history. And it also demonstrates that the roots of why we're having difficulty sometimes recognizing the full humanity of everyone that's in this nation. The same issue has arisen for other people in this country, not just African Americans. Until we teach the full breadth of the American experience, there will be those who reach back and try the tactics of the past to try to gain advantage. The history of African Americans is a story of triumph and tragedy. It provides us lessons along the way that we must absorb and learn in order to achieve a more perfect union. As Maya Angelou said in one of my favorite poems detailing the Black experience, she said, "Despite it all, and still I rise." It is my hope that we join to get together today as a community in celebration of this history that is our history, and that we rise together as we learn and celebrate one another. Happy Black History Month.